Hello. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining our very first Trust Chats live. Uh, Also, a tongue twister if you want to try that out. You are welcome if you would like to hide your video, but also I welcome you to share your video also as a chance for us to make it more of a community, because I know that can be helpful. Thanks, Haskell. Good to see many of you. We'll get started in just a moment. Hey, Elaine. All right. It's a party. How's everyone doing today? You can use an emoji. Hey,
Great.
Tavy. Hey, Lee.
Hello, how's it going?
Good.
Good.
Okay. Well, I want to make sure I respect all of your time. It's already 12:01 and we're going to get started. So I also have Azanta here, and Azanta's going to be letting people in so I don't leave people in the waiting room. I may or may not have done that a few times. And then also, Azanta, especially towards the end, when people have questions, they can put in the chat. I am not going to be looking at the chat during my presentation because I find it distracting. But I will pull from it as we go along. And some of you ask questions in advance, which is super awesome. So with that, we are here today with this first Trust Chats live on how to get feedback to your boss. And I'm really excited about the topic. So let's get started here with a brief overview. I am recording this, which you probably heard when you joined. But I wanted to be very aware that we are working on making it so you should only, the video content will be about what I'm presenting or what I'm responding to. But if you have a question, we would not have your recording as part of that because maybe hypothetically the question's about your boss. And if this was on the World Wide Web, you know, we just want to be aware of that. So I'm going to do a brief intro. I know many of you, but it'd be nice to give a little intro for those who might not know the why behind these trust chats. And then I have a 20-minute brief content brief, and then we're opening it up for conversation Q&A. So hi all. For those who don't know me, my name is Dallas Scott. I am the founder and principal of Trust. And Trust is an organization. I do a lot of consulting work, working with many of you, a lot of higher ed, a lot of mission-driven organizations. And I really, really like doing that work. I really like working with teams. I really like providing support. I do a lot of facilitation. I do a lot of strategic guidance and strategic planning. And one of the things that I realized is this ability to work with other people and to facilitate strong meetings and to have difficult conversations is a skill set that everyone should have. And so I do in-person trainings and I do live remote trainings, but I realized in order to have a larger reach, I really wanted to create a series that gives these tools and resources on an on-demand sort of way. So that is why I started the Growing Trust series, and it's the Trust Chat Live sort of came out of it because our community in the Growing Trust series, the students who take part, there's a little comment board where people have been asking awesome questions. And Azant and I were talking about like how nice would it be to bring some of these live and in real time. And so, ta-da! Here we are today. The reason why we're doing it now is because we just kind of launched the series with awesome insights and feedback from someone who has a lot of knowledge on this on-demand tools, and so it's upgraded. We're looking pretty fancy these days. Okay. I did want to do a quick poll because this is about the main topic is how to give feedback to a boss, but I realize that there's more to that. And so I created a quiz. I'm interested if you're here because you want to figure out how to give feedback to your boss, whether you're a boss and you want to figure out how to get your staff to give you feedback, or maybe it's a little bit of both. So I'm just launched the poll and give you a chance to respond. Awesome. And I'll share results here. So looks like we have a majority of both, which makes sense. And then kind of a split. We have obviously the coming here for feedback for your boss, and then an individual who's here because they want people to give them feedback, which I really appreciate. So thanks for being here. Thanks for the quick quiz. And I'm going to jump into the content right now, without further ado. So I have found that there is a lot of things that we have found ourselves willing to do to advance in our career, right? We often are willing to put in extra hours, work weekends, to maybe do public speaking when we're not comfortable with that. There's a lot that we really have put ourselves out there for to really advance in our career. And the one thing that I find is usually the most tricky for lots of people is this kind of more emotional labor side of setting clear boundaries and practicing that honest, direct, and thoughtful feedback. And one of the bigger challenges that I have found is, yes, it is hard to give feedback across the board, yet sometimes when it comes to setting boundaries, it can be feedback up to your boss. And that can be especially challenging, which is why I wanted that to be the focus for today. So I am going to start off talking about a couple of things. One, usually when I'm looking at everyone here, my guess is the exact feedback that you want to give to your boss is going to be different. So I didn't want to spend the time going through everyone's individual, like, hey, what if this is what I have to say? Or what is this if this is what I had to say? Because I feel like that's too zoomed in anyways. Sometimes we get so hung up on the feedback itself that we miss the picture of why this is so hard to begin with. So we're going to zoom out a little bit. And I want to zoom out so we can talk about our relationship with feedback. Because at the end of the day, this actually is the more tricky thing. Actual giving feedback, and I think this is amazing with any hard thing we do with relationships, it is just like words coming out of our mouth, right? It's physically not hard to give feedback. It's the emotional piece and our relational piece that comes out of it that is the really hard piece of it. So we're going to be focusing on our relationship with feedback and doing so in a way as we think about our history, right? So our relationship with feedback can be a number of different things. It can be coming from our culture, right? Whether giving feedback, especially in a hierarchical place, is okay, our family history, our relationship, and whether we've gotten feedback and was not received well to a school or a teacher, whether you are an athlete and you were used to getting feedback all the time, or you had a coach that was like not super kind about giving feedback. You have past bosses, past staff, our friends, and romantic partners. Like all of these things are part of our story and why giving feedback can be hard or easy, or maybe easy for some people and hard for some people. I know for my family history, I did not have great success in giving feedback to my parents, right? It didn't actually come off very well, and they were really reactive to that. So that's a learning behavior that I had of giving feedback upwards to authority that I had to learn from. That being said, I had teachers who really responded well when I gave feedback, and some that wasn't. So all of these have shaped my relationship with feedback, and I had to really be aware of that in order to think about giving and receiving feedback to people in my life now. But that's not all. We're not just talking about our relationship with feedback. We're talking about the relationship with feedback to the person we want to give feedback to. And that's just a whole nother piece of it, right? Because they have their culture, their family history, their schools and teachers and coaches and past bosses and staff and friends and romantic partners that are overlapping with our desire to give feedback. And this is where I think it gets tricky, because maybe you've given feedback to someone and they responded really well and it felt really easy. And maybe you've given feedback to someone else and it did not go well and did not feel good afterwards. And I think the fact that it's like always a mystery makes you maybe a little hesitant to want to do that. If you've always gotten an awesome response with feedback, we probably wouldn't be in the situation where it feels uncomfortable. But show of hands, how many people have had training on how to give and receive feedback? Amy, awesome. Azanta and Tavi, awesome. Yes, so that this is huge. And I think part of it is like if we don't actually have this training and this practice and this understanding around it, it is can be a really scary thing. And the reality is you might have your relationship, the person you're giving their feedback to also has their relationship, and that is something that needs to be part of the discussion when you're looking to give feedback. The other thing that we need to be aware of is our relationship with hierarchy, right? Really like this diagram because it actually shows you pushing feedback upwards towards your boss. There is actually this like labor, as you can like physically imagine being like, I have to give this up to you. It's much easier to give down than to give up, maybe, right? Sometimes feedback is hard regardless of what direction, but I just wanted to really highlight that not only so we have our relationship with feedback, but we also have our relationship with hierarchy, right? So maybe you have a certain relationship with hierarchy and that you've been in really like organizations that were really strict about it, or you feel like really have to respect where people are in hierarchy. Maybe your boss feels really strongly about hierarchy. Maybe your boss like doesn't feel hierarchical at all, but you do. So they're like, I wish someone would give me feedback, but no one wants to because there's this like hierarchical push there. So all of those things can be incredibly tricky. And on top of that, we have a relationship with hierarchy. We have our relationship with feedback, the double layer. Are we getting a sense for why this is so tricky? And I think you guys know this
Dallas,
intuitively.
I think, are you trying to share slides as you're speaking? Because we're not seeing them.
I
I'm seeing them.
Yeah.
I see him.
I can
Oh.
see them.
Yeah.
the group
Sorry, I
are
guess it's just me.
pretty split in half. I think there's someone else who's not seeing them. If you all are joining via Zoom on your computer, there's a tab at the top of your screen that's like one is meeting, one is Dallas's screen. If you see that, toggle to Dallas's screen, and you should be able to see the slides.
Thank you.
Thank you, Azanta. I was like, whoa, thanks for the feedback. Man, if you hadn't said that, I would hate to do an entire presentation and no one being willing to tell me they can't see my slides. Cool. We good? Onward. Okay. So again, we're talking about kind of a multiple level of your relationship and your boss's relationship with feedback. And this can bop around to whoever you're trying to give feedback to. Maybe you want to give feedback to the fancy pants boss, or someone else's boss that you're not directly reporting to. All of those are going to be different relationships and a different relationship with feedback, right? Can you guys feel into your bodies here? Think about giving like a peer feedback. Maybe it registers as like an eek. But then think about giving your boss feedback. Does the eco meter maybe goes like a little higher? What about someone else's boss? How does that feel? Like off limits? Yeah, right? There's a lot if we just pause and think about it, like, oh, that doesn't feel good at all. Or maybe that would be easier because I have a stronger relationship with this person. So much of it is dependent on our relationships here. Okay, so there's a lot there. And I think one of the reasons why we don't get feedback is because there is sort of this mystery of the other person's circle, right? We don't know what their relationship is. We don't know, how they feel about hierarchy. So the thing that I really like to hone in on is that you can only control what is in your circle. But there's a lot that you can do in that circle to control. And so I'm going to go through that now. So the first thing, we're going to go in this order here, is one, you got to get really clear about what your feedback is about. Sometimes we're uncomfortable, and so we are not super clear about what we're asking for or what we're giving feedback on. And that can be really kind of leave the person you're giving feedback to in feeling confused or uncertain what you're asking for. You need to get curious on what the other person may be experiencing, right? Practice beforehand, give yourself that space, be prepared to receive feedback in return. I think maybe sometimes we don't want to give feedback because what if they give us feedback back? And I'm going to talk about why that's a good thing. And then reach out with a request for feedback. And so let's go through those now. Interesting. Okay, so what does it mean to be clear on feedback? I know that I've been in a situation before, and I'm going to do these relatively quickly because we don't have a whole lot of time. And if you are interested, you can go deep into giving and receiving feedback with other tools that I have. But I think one of the things that I know I personally have felt in organizations I've worked with or people I've worked with is that I'm not 100% sure why I'm not liking it. Like, I'm not 100% sure why things aren't feeling great at work. And I know it has to do with my boss a little bit, but I can't put my finger on it. And it's hard to get feedback when you're like, I don't know, I sort of feel like meh, because that's not clear, right? Like, what do you do with that as if you are giving that up to your boss? So I have found this resource by David Rock to be really helpful, this SCARF feeling, to understand, like, where am I feeling rewarded at work? And the opposite of that, where am I feeling threatened, right? And so the feelings of threatened are sort of this fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response, sort of our lizard brains. Or is there any time where I find myself feeling like extra aggressive, like, oh, that just made me so mad? Or were you just sort of shut down and are confused? Or you just like walk away, I just need to be out of the situation? Or in some case, like go into hyperactive people pleasing mode, right? Like these are indicators that you might be threatened in certain parts of your job and you just like haven't been able to identify it yet. So do you feel like you have status, that you're recognized for your position? Do you feel you have certainty? There's predictability in your work? Do you feel you have autonomy? Are you able to manage your work? Or are you being micromanaged and that just feels uncomfortable? You find yourself really frustrated or kind of learned helplessness in that space? Are you treated as a colleague or do you feel othered, right? That can really impact what it feels like to show up at work. And fairness. Do you feel like you were treated fairly or compensated fairly for your work? All of those pieces can help you hone in a little bit more. Maybe you're like, no, I really feel like I have status. I actually feel like I have a lot of autonomy. What's really tricky right now is uncertainty in our work. And that is impacting my ability to show up fully. So again, honing in, maybe it's none of these things. Maybe you know exactly what it is, but I think my main takeaway here is the more clear you can get, especially when it comes to feedback, clear is kind. The more clear you can get, the easier it is for you to be able to problem solve around it. Next, get curious on what the other person's bubbles might look like, right? So as we know, they have their own relationship with hierarchy. They have their own relationship with feedback. We could ask them, I really am curious about your relationship with feedback and hierarchy, because I think this is a big part of maybe having a culture that we are able to give and receive feedback more. But I kind of want to do some investigation first and just ask about these bubbles. I'm happy to share with you my experience. So it can a little bit of sharing here. There's also this term that I really like, the most generous interpretation. When you're thinking about, something that your boss has done, or maybe even just a peer that you work with have done, to get curious of like, you're only observing their behavior, right? Unless you're like in their head, you're only able to actually see their behavior. So one thing that's always helpful is, what might their intentions have been? What's the most generous interpretation of why they made that decision or they acted that certain way around me? How might the situation that you want to bring up to them have been impacting them, right? Is there something that has been tricky for them and you're seeing the same tricky situation, but from a different angle, right? So how can we look at the challenge that you maybe want to get feedback on from their perspective, just to get a little bit of grounding and curiosity? And then what does my feedback say about who they are and their identity? And a story that I have around that is, I've had a boss in the past who I know had a self-concept and an identity of being a feminist. And also they showed behaviors that were sexist towards me, right? And so me giving feedback specifically to a person who I know showed up with a pink pussy hat on one day and was like, I believe in women power and all these things. And I was like, eek, I need to give them feedback about how I don't feel, that I feel like I'm discriminated against based on my sex. Like, that's a tricky one. So I was able to approach my boss with this feedback saying, hey, I've known you enough, and I recognize that an important part of your identity is that you're a feminist, which is one of the reasons why I really want to bring this up, but it's also making me feel really uncomfortable to bring this up because I know this is your identity. Here I go. The other day, when you X, Y, and Z, that felt really uncomfortable, or I felt these are examples of basically very patronizing things that happened towards me that weren't happening towards other peers that were men, right? And I was able to hold that I don't think this is who you are, but this behavior is in opposition of what I think you are trying to show up to be. And I wanted to share that with you. That was a hard one. I had like very sweaty armpits afterwards, to be clear, but I was able to have that conversation, and I felt really proud of myself for that conversation, and it was received well, although you have to imagine they also probably had sweaty armpits in this conversation because I just brought something up that I knew was opposite of how they see themselves. And I think a lot of our bosses see themselves as thoughtful leaders and caring deeply about their staff and wanting to show up. So anything that you bring up that is going to challenge that identity, we just have to be aware that that's just a hard thing to hear from anyone, right? From any perspective. We call it an identity quake when someone identifies feedback that goes against how you see yourself. Okay. So knowing that it's going to be potentially a tricky conversation, right? Practice. And this is actually, I have a link that I'll drop to you on a worksheet. So this is only the first half of the worksheet. The first half of the worksheet is the practice piece. And then the other half, which I'm not showing on my screen right now, is the delivery piece. But it's giving you a chance to prepare for instead of run from these difficult conversations. So describe what happened, recognizing here's the challenge. I'm over here and I can only see one angle of this challenge. You're over here and you're looking at it from a different angle. And I sincerely want to know what you see from your angle, right? Again, curiosity. I'm not assuming, I'm letting you know my experience, and I'm really curious what your experience is. What do you see from your side of this tricky situation that I'm looking at? You get to share and write down, how has this impacted me? What does it say about who I am and my identity, right? Like, I was raised as someone who doesn't complain. So this is really tricky for me to bring up feedback because I'm having a hard time with like managing these sense of identity that I have and your identity. What might their intentions been? What might the situation impact? And then how did you both contribute, right? And I think that's the preparing yourself for receiving feedback is most of the time we have both contributed something to this challenging, tricky situation. So you have to be curious with yourself of, how might I have contributed to this piece? And how might they have contributed? I can only really share my piece and share what I see from them. And I'm hoping that they feel comfortable sharing what they see as contributions as well. And then the last piece I wanted to point out here is like, what do you hope to accomplish with this conversation, right? Like, I really hope to have a stronger working relationship. This is really important to me. And I would love to troubleshoot, or I have this goal that my team feels more engaged and has a higher morale. And I think you have a lot of experience with this, and I know I have a lot of experience with this. And my goal is that at the end of this conversation, we can come up with a plan to increase the morale of our team, right? And then be prepared to receive feedback in return. This is tricky, right? We want to give feedback. We have feedback we want to share, and then they come back with feedback for you. And I've experienced this. I've been on the receiving end of it where I'm like, I want to share this with you. And they're like, well, actually, now that you've mentioned it. And I think this idea of opening door to feedback can feel scary, but it's actually a really good thing because you know what the challenge is. I think what's a little unfair is when you give feedback to your boss. Wrong way. You give feedback to your boss and they're like, oh, speaking of which, the reason why I micromanage you is because I have not found you being reliable with your deadlines. And you're like, you're telling me this now? How long have I worked for you, right? Like, I think that can be a really tricky situation to have that emotional labor of like saying, yikes, I feel like I'm being micromanaged. And the immediate response being like, well, that's because you're not reliable, or that's the first time you've heard that, right? So we have to be able, this is the practice piece, to find our ground and realize that there might identify a contribution on your end, and to say, okay, I still want to talk about my feedback and I want to hear your feedback, and I want to come up with a goal together where maybe I'm show up more reliable to you and understand what that means. What does reliable mean to you? And that through that, I can not be as micromanaged in my work, right? That is a way where both of you share your contributions and look for a solution. Okay. And sometimes I find this is a little more tricky. You give feedback and they give you feedback on how you gave feedback. And that's always like, oh man. I've realized sometimes they're like, I don't mind the feedback, but I didn't like that you gave it to me in front of my colleagues. Like that actually was, I had an old staff member who gave feedback and got kind of in trouble for giving feedback in front of another person. So, how can we learn from that and recognize two different tracks, feedback you want to give and feedback on feedback, but you can still both learn from it, and still make sure, okay, it sounds like we have two levels of feedback now. I have feedback for you, and you gave me feedback on how to give feedback. So let's learn on both of those pieces. Okay. And then I think the last piece I wanted to share with you is request feedback. Don't jump out of the bushes with your feedback. And I think sometimes because we are uncomfortable with it, we're like, oh, I don't want them to know. I'm just going to say it really fast. I'm going to run away. But it is helpful to give advance notice for the same reason that I mentioned above, sort of our lizard brain, right? Think about the snake up here and imagine me saying, hey, there's a snake around the corner. Do you want to take a look at it? And you're probably like, no. But I'm really glad to know it's there. Okay, I'm going to go over. Yep, there's a snake, but you're probably not going to have the same response as if you were to turn the corner and just see a snake, right? So they might not be like super excited that you asked for a conversation about feedback, but they're going to be prepared for it and therefore more likely to stay grounded and not jump into one of these kind of threat responses. Okay, almost done here. And then the last thing is when you're going to share your feedback and your relationship with feedback. So I have this little script for you all here that you could use. I have an evolving relationship with feedback, and I'm learning if done thoughtfully, feedback is a way to show I care about you as my boss and the overall success of this organization. Giving feedback still makes me uncomfortable, and I'm doing it even though it's hard for me. So any of you who are a boss out there, just if you can imagine your staff starting their feedback with this, you'd probably be a little, attuned to their request, because you can tell they are working hard and that it is emotional labor to do that. And to the point when anyone gives me feedback, my first thought is, oh my gosh, thank you for trusting me enough to give me feedback. That is not easy, especially if it's coming upwards. Okay, so what I want to do now is I've got some questions in advance that I do want to make sure I cover, and it looks like there's things in the chat. So with that, a lot of the chats was you can't see it. Cool. Does anyone have any questions or comments? And then I will jump into the chat. Okay, I'm going to just start with this first one. How to share morale issues from team to the boss that is very bottom line deliverable driven. So I think this is a great question. And one of the things that I thought about immediately was making the connection between your team's morale and the bottom line and deliverables driven, right? I don't know about you, but if I have low morale, I am not as efficient and effective in my work than when I have high morale. So it'd be really interesting to be able to make this connection and that recognize that if you go through that worksheet that says, I really have this end goal of our team being able to really drive these important initiatives forward because we're mission driven and we all care a lot about it. And right now, there's some key things that is really impacting our morale. And then I would really also kind of lean on maybe that SCARF model because morale can be like really squishy. Like, what is it about morale? Is it uncertainty? I mean, if you're in higher ed, there's a good chance uncertainty is right in front of your face right now about your work and what you're doing. And maybe there could be a couple of other things that are on there. So maybe unpack what it means to what morale means, because I think that can be a code word for lots of things. How do you get more clear on that? And then make that connection to their value set of bottom line and deliverables, because I think they're really closely connected. Any follow-up to that question? Okay. The next question was signs a boss is open to feedback and the timing is good. One good thing about asking for feedback and like, hey, I would like to have a one-on-one is they will let you know if the timing is good, right? Versus you trying to guess, is the timing good? I'm not sure. So I think that is one great thing. And the other thing, sometimes you don't know if your boss is open to feedback until you start talking about feedback. And I think that is the initial scary thing. But you can get a good temperature check around feedback by just starting the conversation. And maybe you don't start with feedback as like that red dot, like I showed earlier, but maybe you start the conversation with this person of, hey, I just did this like trust chat, and they like best practices to, before you need to give feedback, ask people that you work with what their relationship with feedback is. Can I ask you how your relationship with feedback is? The other piece, which is tricky here, and one of the reasons why I give training on feedback to teams, is that everyone on your team is getting this training and feedback at the same time, and everyone's getting a shared vocabulary, and everyone's appreciating how hard it is to give and receive feedback, and we're sharing stories of how hard it is. So when we have a time to ask for feedback, people are more willing to be like, oh, you're giving me feedback. Cool. That means you like trust me and this is really hard for you, but you're doing it anyways. I love it. And people really do start seeing it as a gift and not as this like weaponized thing that happens at work. Any other questions on that question? All right, moving on. How do you recommend holding a boss accountable after sharing feedback? Oh, that's the hardest piece. There's actually a couple here where people ask that. Like, what if your feedback is, what if your feedback was ignored? Or like you bring it up, but nothing's changed afterwards. This is where this is just not at work, I am sure. How many people have given feedback in a romantic relationship and nothing changed? And you're like, well, do I bring it up again? And then you have this identity. What does that say about my identity? Does that mean I'm that person that always brings things up? Often women get called as a nagging by bringing things up again and again, right? And we might have this identity like, I do not want that to be my label. This is really tricky. And also, I think this goes back to that relationship with feedback and that relationship with hierarchy and understanding this. And in the worksheet, in fact, I think I will, I have a squirrely mouse today. One of the things I wanted to make sure I shared with you, and I'm actually going to put it in the chat now because I think it's important just because I don't want to forget. When we think about this difficult conversation, copy link. Okay, paste. I don't think it's going to work. One sec. I got to open it up in a different format. Anyways, I'll get that too. Is to have a plan. So when you give feedback, especially if it's the first time you're giving it to them, you're sharing it, you're giving feedback with a shared goal or help, like working with them to identify a goal, right? So it's not like, I want to give you feedback. Oh, thank goodness I said it. Like your feedback your goal shouldn't be just to give the feedback. Your goal should be for something to happen from you giving feedback. And so what I think is really valuable is when you're preparing for it, be prepared to also have an ask with your feedback. Here's my feedback. Here's my goal. I would like to see this change. Can we talk about it? When's the next time that we can check up on this, right? You're actually setting a time to have a follow-up in that hard time that you already established for yourself and giving feedback in the first place. And if something doesn't change, I think one of the things that is hard is just having that endurance and saying, all right, I'm going to have feedback about how I haven't heard anything about my feedback, right? And saying, I know it sounded like we were both on the same page, that there was a really good opportunity here. Maybe, again, most generous interpretation, things have been really busy. And also this is important to me. So what can we do? Can we actually both agree on a timeline for something to happen based on this feedback? That one is tricky, and it really is. I do think scheduling that follow-up and having that written recognition and following up after the meeting with, hey, I really appreciate our conversation. I'm writing down what we agreed on, so we just have it in a written format. I will follow up in a couple of weeks per my suggestion or per our discussion. So I think this sort of is the same response to this one. And then I think this question, what is the best way to bring up something completely out of the blue without seeming confrontational? I'm guessing this question is more about like, I have feedback from something from like multiple months ago. Maybe that's what this is about. But again, I think it is okay just to, instead of it being out of the blue, schedule a one-on-one saying, hey, I wanted to talk to you about something that came up a few months ago, and I've just been able to like wrap my brain around it now. And Azanta and I talk about this a lot. Sometimes there's these little things that don't feel worthy of giving feedback to because they seem so small. And you're like, it's such a small thing, I'm not going to bring it up. But then it happens a few times, but you still haven't brought it up, and now you don't want to bring up something that's that far in the past. Is that resonating with anyone? Yeah, I think it's totally appropriate to group feedback, right? Like, it could have been a one-off thing, and my most generous interpretation was you were having an off day, and that's why you spoke to me that way. But it's happened a few times now. And so I really wanted to bring this up because I know that you're someone who cares about me, and this behavior just doesn't feel great when I'm talked to this way. And then I think the feedback ignored or the challenge piece is interesting. I think when you give feedback and they're like, nah, or that didn't happen, that can feel really hard because you made yourself very vulnerable and your reality is being challenged. Like, I don't think that's actually happening. This is where, again, that worksheet is helpful because it allows you to say, this is just my angle of what's happening, and it's from my perspective. So I can appreciate that you see something differently, but I hope that you can see that I'm seeing this from my angle, from where I'm at.
Dallas, there's a couple follow-ups to what we
excellent.
covered up.
Okay, let me look at this. Okay, would following up with written recap be seen as overbearing, needy? How do we change that perception, right? I really appreciate that comment because this is that evaluation apprehension. This is like a term in group psychology, is evaluation apprehension. Is I'm worried about how people are going to see me. And bringing it up once was hard enough, but me bringing it up again and then being labeled as being difficult or needy or overbearing is really kind of uncomfortable and unfair. And to that, I would say, share that thought bubble, right? That thought bubble of saying, I'm hesitant to bring this up again because I don't want to be like, I have a fear of being like viewed in this way. And also I think it's important, and we had talked about it, and I really think follow-up would be really helpful for me. Whenever I'm stuck, that's where I go, is like I talk the thought bubble of like, wait, this doesn't seem fair. I will pop it and say, ooh, this doesn't seem fair. We had both agreed on a date and it didn't happen. So, I just want to make sure we're following up on that. It's easy to dismiss things in the moment, but when things build up, it makes it so big and daunting. Yes, totally. I love that. Do you have an example of creating moments of low stakes feedback across the team that get everyone more comfortable with it, especially a way to include a boss in that format with a new team that may have different relationship? One of the things that I find super helpful is to operationalize feedback. And this is something I cover in the Trust Together series around building a stronger team that has that feedback culture, is being really strong and set roots as early as you can with your team. And even if your team has been around for a while, being like, we're doing a reboot, folks. We're doing a reboot. And instead of talking, like saying, feedback, everyone get feedback now, we're going to say, we are going to talk about feedback. We're going to talk about why it's difficult. We're going to talk about why it's important. We're going to talk about feedback that changed our lives for the better, right? And we're so glad that someone gave us feedback. We're going to talk about all of those things and we're going to normalize it. And when I have a new hire, one of my first questions is, tell me about your relationship with feedback and how do you like to receive feedback? I had one staff member who absolutely would love to hear it in an email first, so she can like process it and then be ready. And then I let them know, cool, you're getting onboarded. You're going to have so much feedback. I'm going to give you so much feedback in the first few months because there's so much you don't know. And so I'm going to practice and I'm going to share it with you. And we're going to talk about how it might be difficult that I'm giving you feedback. And I'm going to give myself feedback at the same time. And I'm going to give you a chance to get feedback. So we say feedback so many times that at a certain point, it is just part of the conversation. And maybe, Azanti, you can share your experience of coming from a place that wasn't doing that to a place working with me that was like what we did the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like a breath of fresh air, but it doesn't get like easier when you're receiving feedback. I think it just makes it like each time, like you still get those, sweaty, anxious feelings, but you always consistently feel better afterwards. And it was like I will take that like few moments of just like, okay, I need to give Dallas some feedback or vice versa. I know something is coming versus like just like those pressure cookers over the course of like 2 years worth of just not being seen, heard, and a lot of like probably what feels like irrational emotion, but is just a buildup of a lot of feedback, a lot of things that feedback could have solved.
And there's this quote that I really like that is, when we are unable to give feedback, at the end of the day, we stop seeing their behaviors as bad. We start seeing the person as bad. Absolutely. And it actually impacts our relationship with the person. And the reality is I've been in a handful of relationships where I'm like starting to dislike the person. And I'm like, ooh, I think I have not followed my feedback rule because I'm like, I don't really want to give feedback, but I can feel it building up. And so this is where it really is kind to be clear and kind with your feedback versus not. And I talk about this in the training, but I like the example of having food stuck in between your teeth, right? Has anyone been at a conference with food in their teeth and then you don't realize until you go to the bathroom and you're like, what? Does no one care about me? No one was able to like give me a little like heads up about this, right? Well, I find that way when it comes to feedback that if no one's willing to tell me, I actually don't feel very supported. I also, when someone does tell me I have feedback in my teeth, I am very embarrassed. Even though I'm grateful they told me, I am also very embarrassed that I had it. And you can tell that they're kind of embarrassed for me too and didn't really want to tell me, but they did. And so there's this way of thinking about feedback where if I had food in my teeth at a conference, I wouldn't want someone to tell me while I was in the middle of, like, hey, everyone stop, Dallas, you have something in your teeth. I'm like, oh, I really wish you would have discreetly told me that to the side. And I think feedback's a little bit that way too, of like, I think this is really important because I don't want you to walk around with this blind spot. Like I can't see that I have food in my teeth. So I think if we can look at feedback from that way, it's really helpful. And I think, giving analogies like that, giving your team a shared vocabulary, one of the reasons why I set up the Growing Trust series to specifically this one to be more like a book club is that you can actually go through it together and like pause after a section of the course and be like, oh my gosh, what did you guys learn about this? I learned that I get like super uncomfortable over these things, or I learned I can give feedback, but receiving it's harder for me, and then you're having conversation about feedback, but not yet going straight to the feedback. And that gives a little bit more cushion and sort of the naming it to tame it. So when you're in it, we can say, oh, okay, I can identify. And I mean, Azanta and I were facilitating a session yesterday, and it's the first time we've done it in person. And I was like, we're going to do this. She's like, what are you talking about? I was like, oh yeah, you haven't done this with me before. And so we kind of like, we're stepping on toes a bit. But we were immediately, because we have the practice, Azanta was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I didn't do very good in that moment. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like this is the first time we did it. And my contribution is I just was talking to you as though you've done this training with me. And she's like, well, my contribution is this. And so we immediately were able to give each other that feedback and understand that we weren't on our A game and then move on. And instead of me secretly harboring against Azanta being like, I can't believe she stepped on my toe. And Azanta being like, oh, she threw me to the wolves, right? We were able to have that debrief within that moment, be really clear about the thing that felt off, and then move on.
And Dallas, maybe there's Gabriella mentioned in the chat like the opposite end where you're just receiving a lot of feedback or giving a lot of feedback like over and over and over, and it starts to feel like it starts to, have the opposite effect.
Ooh, that's a really good question. Ooh, this is a tricky one because I remember getting advice from a mentor once that there is every culture, everywhere you work is going to have rough seas, right? Where the water is super choppy. And then you like weather that storm and you're like, oh, okay, I can do that. We're all going to have that. The thing he told me to look out for is the undertow. That's the thing that's harder to see, but pulls you either under or in the direction you don't actually want to be in or believe in. And it's the undertow. If you're in an organization where you're working really hard on feedback and you really do want to move things forward, or if you're getting feedback and you feel like you're doing what you can and you've responded to it, there's a question of like, ooh, is this the right place for me to be working? And I just want to put that out there because sometimes you try your best and nothing seems to be working. And I think it's okay to like question, like, this doesn't feel good to me to be here and to never feel seen or heard with this feedback. And I think that could be kind of like your almost final last feedback, right? I've definitely given feedback at past organizations where I'm like, this is sort of I don't want to work in a place that's not willing to do this feedback. Which is, you have to be able to have that walking power and that is a privilege to be able to choose to leave a job, especially in times of uncertainty. But sometimes it's just like the culture is not going to support feedback or not going to support feedback in a hierarchical way, and something to be aware of. I don't necessarily mean that's happening, and maybe I'm misreading this question. But if you're getting feedback and you're feeling like they continue to bring it up and whatever you're doing isn't right, I think another question is for them to get even more clear and have some sort of metrics so you can kind of work towards a metrics versus sort of anecdotal feedback. Thanks. Any thoughts on how to handle being the funnel between, yes, oh my gosh, that role is really tricky. To be like needing to give feedback between the two. In some ways, I think that's an important role. as a manager is to be able to be the interpreter and know how to give feedback clearly to your team that is maybe not being said super delicately from them to you. So yeah, I think that is one piece of it. And also, I think it's really hard. I really am a believer of being developing the skill set of everyone to be able to give that feedback. And that would be interesting feedback to give to the Fancy Pants boss of, hey, what you're saying is really important. And I know part of my job is to give this feedback to my team, and I will. And also, it'd be really helpful if there's a way that you can help me articulate it in a more clear way so they can understand, or maybe even in an email format that I can send out to everyone and then talk through it, or maybe you'd be willing to have a Q&A session about the feedback that you gave, right? So they have a chance to recognize the faces behind the feedback that they're giving. Are there ways to identify a team with feedback that is operationalized in the culture when looking at different jobs or opportunities? Ooh, I love this. I think one is to ask that question. Like when you're doing an interview saying, I would love to know about your feedback culture. The other is to see if they ask you about feedback. I know that was always one of my questions when I'm interviewing someone is like, tell me about a time when you receive feedback. What is your comfort level with feedback? Like I feel like any skill can be developed if someone has a kind of a growth mindset and is able to give feedback. Anything else? You know, everyone's muted and that's okay. And also feels less of a conversation and more of a Dallas is talking a lot.
I did have a question I was going to ask if I can.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah, my question is, so if I want to give feedback to a boss, I also want to receive feedback. Do you like to just do that in one, like open the floodgates meeting? Do you separate them into different discussions? Like I'm going to focus on you, and then we're going to flip the tables and you focus on me. How do you structure the actual engagement?
Yes. So thank you for asking that. I think one of the things that I have learned is modeling feedback, and that it's tricky. So especially with someone who reports to me, and Azanta and I have a meeting portfolio, which is in the goodie bag of the series that I have together, these tools to help operationalize feedback with your staff is we don't do it every week, but probably, at least twice a month, we give feedback to each other. And we actually just have almost like a table in our online shared document where we spend 5 minutes quietly writing feedback to ourselves. So I give feedback to me, like, hey, strength, I did this thing and I'm really proud of myself. Improvable, Azanta, I completely derailed your meeting. I am very sorry. That is a meeting behavior I have of an agenda hijacker, and I identify it, and I just wanted to say that to you. I also have this feedback for you, and then there is a spot for her to give feedback to me. And one of the things that I find really helpful about that is that it is not just I always have feedback for you piece, and it gives you an opportunity to get ahead of feedback, which can be a lot easier as a direct report to say, can I identify where I feel like I overstepped or where I underperformed? And sometimes like Azanta will say something and I was like, oh, I thought that was great. That didn't bother me at all. That was a worry that you had and you've been holding on to for a couple weeks. Didn't even register for me, right? And so it is such a easier way to operationalize feedback that's two-way. And again, this goes back to sort of the earlier comment, like, how do I get this started? Most people say we want to do feedback, but then the boss isn't willing to actually give feedback or receive feedback, but they're expecting their team to do it, that's a really quick sign that you actually don't mean it. And it's vulnerable and it's hard to do. But I think the person who on the hierarchy thing chart, the one who has like sort of the highest hierarchy, gotta like lean into that. And when I was at my own organization, I did it with my team and I like forced it on my boss. Hi, we're gonna do this thing that I do with my team. I find it really helpful. And I thought that's when I started getting more feedback also. Someone else was about to jump in.
That was me. And it was
Yeah.
kind of also the idea of how to provide feedback. This is kind of a slightly different topic, but providing feedback to your teammates or not teammates, to your direct reports.
Mm-hmm.
I always find that I have a hard time not making it sound really harsh. And I guess it's feedback to anyone really, but and kind of almost immediately backing away from it because I feel like I'm upsetting the person. And it just ends up not being very effective or very clear.
Yeah. And I think that's makes so much sense. And it has taken me so long to get more comfortable giving feedback, and I still am not super comfortable giving feedback. And I just have to know, like, it's kind of just being comfortable with the uncomfortable and leaning on best practices of being as clear as possible. And I think one of the hardest things, and this makes me think about the comment of like, I keep getting the same feedback, but then if I like try to change and it's not super clear, like they're still saying I'm not delivering. My guess it's because the person who's giving you feedback is not super comfortable with it, and that to spend more time to make it super clear is even more emotional labor. And most times people, it's like a run and dump and then they keep going. And I think to like pause and say, can we talk about our relationship with feedback right now? Because I keep getting this feedback and it's unclear and I want to get it clear. And I know that it might just be a whole dialogue around our relationship with feedback and what's comfortable and what's not. Can we talk about that first? And then maybe I'll better understand where you're coming from. And it really de-risks the situation to do that. I'm cognizant of the time here, and I want to make sure this link works for everybody. So here is this tool, and I'm hoping it opens for you. So go ahead and click it and give me a green light. It's going to ask you to make a copy.
It says enroll in course to unlock.
Oh, that's not it then. Azanta, do you know where I will send it in a follow-up. I had it ready and I was like, I'm good to go. But then
Azanta just shared works, make a copy.
Yes, Azanta, amazing. Thank you so much. So this is the copy of that difficult conversation worksheet. So I wanted to make sure you all are walking away with that because it really is helpful. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention as I wrap up here is there's so much more I have to say on this. As I was going through this with Azanta, she's like, "Who are you going to talk about? Like feedback triggers? Are you going to talk about the thing? Are you going to talk about that?" I was like, "No, because it's only an hour, and I want to make sure we get to questions. And there's all these other things. But I do just want to encourage you that there is a lot of resources out there. Trust Together is the one that specifically talks about feedback. But that is the purpose of the Growing Trust series. If you haven't had a chance, this is where I really hope that people have more tools and resources, and that you can give these tools and resources with your team, because it's so much harder for you to have all the information, and then now you have to share it with everyone and be like, look at all this new thing I'm doing, versus having your team go through it and you all have now a shared vocabulary, and we can shift the conversation to, hey, let's all try this together. That feels really different in the kind of, not just the dot of feedback, but the broader, like your feelings on feedback. And so speaking of feedback, this is my very first trust chat. And so I am looking for your feedback on, how was this for you? Would you recommend it to someone else? Would you change up the order? Would you want more people chatting, or does it feel good for me to read the questions, or Azanta to read the questions, and just keep it sort of a one way? Because I want to be able to adapt and model operationalizing feedback, right? So this is something that I do because I honestly, this is my first go. So anything that you have for feedback would be amazing to let me know about. And then let's see here. Anything else? Yes, here it is. Okay, up next. We have another trust chat coming up. This one is on gossip, why gossip is the ultimate toxic workplace impulse, and also leading change from where you are. There's been a lot of interest in this one here, which I'm super excited about. Interestingly though, not that many people have signed up for the gossip one, and I don't know if it's because they like don't take gossip away from me, or I don't gossip. Both of which is why you need to come to this trust chat, because it really can be the thing that erodes trust in your team, and you might not even realize it's happening. Maybe those little comments or things that take place. There's little things you can do to shift the dialogue from gossip to constructive conversation. And honestly, 9 times out of the 10, the reason why people are gossiping is because they don't feel comfortable giving feedback. If they develop their skill set in giving feedback, they'd be less likely to have that pressure cooker buildup and less likely to feel a need to get rid of that pressure through gossiping about that person. So they're very interconnected. You guys will have a leg up with the feedback one. And I really hope you can join. So with that, yes, there is a recording afterwards. We are going to tidy it up for everybody to have the main pieces of it. Any other questions, let me know, and I'm hanging out for a little while, so you're welcome to chat because it's been a while since I've seen some of you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording somehow.
Shall I have a question for you?